Chapter 1. A Cat's Perfect Life. Felix had always lived a charmed life. From the moment he opened his eyes as a kitten in his warm and comfortable London flat, he had known nothing but love, warmth, and security. His humans adored him, lavishing him with soft beds, an abundance of toys, and the finest food a cat could wish for. His days were filled with delicious meals served promptly when his tummy rumbled, clean water when he felt thirsty, and the loving strokes of his owner's hands whenever he needed comfort. From the first light of dawn to the quiet hum of the evenings, Felix knew his life was as close to perfect as a house cat could get. Every morning began with the delightful scent of breakfast wafting from the kitchen, and by mid-afternoon he could often be found lounging on his favorite sunny spot by the window, the sun warming his sleek black fur with its white patches gleaming brightly. There was no shortage of love or affection in Felix's life. He had his own cozy little bed nestled by the radiator, where he could curl up on chilly days and nap in peaceful bliss. When his owners were home, they would often sit beside him, gently scratching behind his ears in a way that made him purr with contentment. And when they weren't, he had the soft hum of the television and the quiet sounds of the city outside the window to keep him company. For as long as Felix could remember, life had been predictable, comforting in its routine. He never worried about where his next meal would come from or if he would be warm on the coldest nights. Life was good, filled with everything a cat could possibly need. Felix was happy, or so he believed. That is until one cold winter's day when something changed. It all began one evening as Felix lay sprawled on the windowsill. His owners had been watching television as usual, sipping tea and laughing at something or other. Felix, in his drowsy state, wasn't paying attention until a sudden burst of light and color flashed across the screen. It was a travel program, showing off the grand sights of London, the bustling streets, the tall buildings, the riverside lights that twinkled like stars. Felix's green eyes sharpened as he watched. The city outside wasn't just a faraway hum of sound or a blur of colors beyond the glass. It was alive, vibrant, and filled with wonders he had never imagined. For the first time, Felix felt an itch deep inside him. He had been content to watch the world from the safety of his windowsill for so long, but now something stirred within him, urging him to explore, to experience the world beyond the glass for himself. That night, as Felix curled up in his bed, the images of London's streets and lights played through his mind. The familiar warmth of his home, though comforting, suddenly seemed small compared to the vastness that lay outside. The pull of adventure was strong, and Felix found himself unable to resist the call of the unknown any longer. Chapter 2. The Leap into the Night. The next evening, Felix's curiosity got the better of him, as he sat by the kitchen window, watching the snow begin to fall gently outside. The window above the sink caught his eye. It had been left slightly open, just enough for a nimble cat to slip through. The cold air filtered into the warm kitchen, carrying with it the tantalizing scents of the city. The dampness of pavement, the distant fragrance of food, and a faint trace of excitement that Felix couldn't quite place. Without a moment's hesitation, Felix leaped onto the windowsill, his heart racing with a mix of trepidation and excitement. He peered outside into the quiet alley that lay below. It was unfamiliar, but strangely inviting. His warm, familiar bed still beckoned from the other side of the room, but the allure of the night was too powerful to ignore. With one last glance over his shoulder, Felix stepped through the gap in the window, his paws landing softly on the cold metal of the fire escape. The winter air stung his nose, and the cold bit into his fur. But Felix didn't retreat. He patted down the metal steps with grace, feeling an unfamiliar thrill course through him as he descended into the alley below. The city sprawled before him in all its grandeur. Tall buildings rose against the dark sky, their windows aglow with light. The hum of traffic filled the air, punctuated by the occasional honk of a car horn or the distant rumble of a double-decker bus. The sounds of life, a life Felix had never truly been a part of, echoed through the streets like a song just beyond his reach. As he stepped onto the snow-covered ground, Felix felt a surge of excitement. He was no longer just a house cat. He was an explorer, a traveler in his own city, ready to discover the world outside the safe confines of his flat. The city's streetlights cast a warm glow over the streets, reflecting off the snow and making the entire city seem as though it had been dipped in golden light. Felix's breath formed small clouds in the cold air as he wandered further from his building, his paws crunching softly in the snow. The cold didn't bother him now. It only added to the sense of adventure that filled his heart. Felix slipped through the shadows, moving unnoticed between the legs of strangers who hurried by, oblivious to the little black and white cat weaving through the crowds. He marveled at the people, their bundled-up forms rushing past him in thick coats and scarves, some laughing and talking, others with their heads down against the cold. Felix had never been this close to so many people at once, and it filled him with a strange sense of exhilaration. As he continued down the street, Felix passed a small pub, its windows fogged up from the warmth inside. Laughter and music spilled out into the cold night air, and Felix paused for a moment, his whiskers twitching with amusement. A man standing outside the pub dropped a chip onto the ground, and Felix darted forward, quickly snatching it up before anyone noticed. The chip was salty and greasy, a far cry from the gourmet meals Felix was used to, but there was something thrilling about scavenging for food in the city streets. The lights of the West End soon came into view, casting a dazzling glow over the streets. Theaters lined the road, their marquees gleaming brightly, announcing the names of famous shows in bold letters. Felix watched in awe as people in their finest clothes gathered outside the grand entrances, chatting excitedly as they waited to be let inside. Felix didn't understand the purpose of theaters or performances, but the magic of it all wasn't lost on him. He could feel it in the air, in the anticipation that lingered around the people waiting outside. It was a world unlike anything he had ever known, and Felix found himself drawn to it, his heart swelling with a strange mixture of wonder and longing. And then, just as he was beginning to feel overwhelmed by the lights and sounds of the city, he saw her, a sleek silver cat, perched gracefully on a low stone wall. Her fur gleamed in the moonlight, and her blue eyes sparkled with interest as she watched him approach. Chapter 3. Meeting Siren. Felix had never seen a cat like her before. She was elegant, poised, with a confidence that seemed to radiate from her with every movement. Felix hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach, but the silver cat gave him a slow blink, a sign of trust among their kind. "Hello." Felix meowed softly, trying to sound casual, though his heart was racing with nerves. "Hello yourself," the silver cat replied, her voice smooth and melodic. "What brings you out on a night like this?" I wanted to see the city," Felix admitted, feeling a bit embarrassed by his own inexperience. "I've never been outside before." The silver cat's whiskers twitched with amusement. "An indoor cat, are you? You've chosen quite the night for your first adventure." Felix nodded, glancing around nervously. "I'm Felix," he said, hoping to make a good impression. The silver cat stepped closer, her blue eyes gleaming with amusement. "I'm Siren," she said, her voice soft but confident. "Welcome to London, Felix." For a moment, they stood in silence, the cold night air swirling around them as the city hummed quietly in the background. Felix felt a strange sense of connection to Siren, as though they were kindred spirits, both drawn to the mysteries of the night in their own ways. "Where are you going?" Siren asked, tilting her head curiously. Felix shrugged, feeling a bit embarrassed. "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm just wandering." Siren smiled, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "That's the best way to see the city," she said. "London has a way of revealing itself to those who don't look for anything in particular." Felix wasn't entirely sure what she meant, but he nodded in agreement. Siren stepped closer to him, her sleek silver fur brushing against his side as she began to walk. "Come with me," she said, her voice a soft purr. "I'll show you a part of the city you won't find in the travel guides." Chapter 4. Brixton Markets. Siren led Felix south through the city, away from the bustling lights of the West End, and into a part of London that Felix had never seen before. The streets were narrower here, lined with old townhouses and small shops, their windows glowing warmly in the darkness. The scent of food filled the air, and Felix's nose twitched as he caught the aroma of spices and herbs that reminded him of the home-cooked meals his owners often made. "This is Brixton," Siren said, as they entered a lively market square. Strings of lights hung overhead, casting a warm glow over the stalls that were still open, despite the late hour. Vendors called out to passers-by, their voices mingling with the sound of music that drifted from a nearby cafe. Felix's eyes widened in amazement as he took in the vibrant atmosphere. The market was filled with people of all kinds, some haggling over prices, others chatting with friends as they browsed the colorful stalls. The air was thick with the scents of fresh produce, baked goods, and exotic spices, and Felix's stomach rumbled at the delicious aromas. Siren led him through the maze of stalls, her movements graceful and fluid as she weaved between the legs of shoppers and vendors alike. Felix followed closely behind, feeling a sense of excitement bubbling up inside him as he took in the sights and sounds of the market. "This place is amazing," Felix said, his eyes wide with wonder. "I've never seen anything like it." Siren smiled, her blue eyes twinkling with amusement. "Brixton is one of the best parts of London," she said. "It's a place where people from all walks of life come together. You can find anything here if you know where to look." They passed a stall selling fresh fish, and Felix's mouth watered at the sight of the plump, glistening fish laid out on ice. Siren noticed his interest and paused, giving Felix a sly look. "Hungry?" she asked with a grin. Felix nodded, feeling a bit sheepish. "A little," he admitted. Siren smirked and darted forward, her movements swift and precise. Before Felix could react, she had swiped a small fish from the stall, her claws moving so quickly that the vendor didn't even notice. "Here," she said, dropping the fish at Felix's paws with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Consider it a welcome gift." Felix hesitated for a moment, glancing around nervously. He had never stolen anything before, and the idea of taking food without permission made him feel a bit uneasy. But the fish smelled so delicious, and Felix's stomach rumbled with hunger. With a grateful meow, Felix quickly devoured the fish, savoring the fresh, salty taste. Siren watched him with amusement, her tail flicking lazily behind her as she waited for him to finish. "You'll get used to it," Siren said with a wink. "Out here, you've got to be quick if you want to survive." Felix licked his lips, feeling a strange mix of guilt and exhilaration. He had never imagined living like this, scavenging for food and sneaking through the city streets. But there was something thrilling about it, something that made Felix feel more alive than he ever had before. As they continued through the market, Felix felt a sense of camaraderie with Siren growing. She was unlike any cat he had ever met, fearless, confident, and full of life. Felix found himself drawn to her energy, her spirit of adventure. Siren was everything Felix had never been but secretly longed to be, and in her presence Felix felt a spark of excitement that he hadn't known he was missing. Chapter 5. The Music of the Night. After exploring the bustling market, Siren led Felix to a quieter part of Brixton, where the streets were lined with colorful murals, and the air was filled with the soft strains of music drifting from open windows. Felix's ears perked up at the sound, and he glanced around curiously, trying to pinpoint where the music was coming from. "Do you hear that?" Felix asked, his whiskers twitching with interest. Siren smiled and nodded. "Brixton has a soul," she said. "Music is a part of life here. You'll hear it everywhere you go." They followed the sound of the music until they reached a small park tucked away between the buildings. A group of musicians had gathered near a bench, playing their instruments with a joyful energy that filled the air with rhythm and melody. Felix and Siren watched from the shadows, their eyes gleaming with fascination as the music swirled around them. Felix had never heard music like this before. It was lively and upbeat, with a rhythm that made his paws itch to move. He'd always enjoyed the soft, classical music that his owners played at home. But this was different. This music was alive, pulsing with energy and emotion that Felix could feel deep in his chest. Without thinking, Felix began to move to the music, his paws tapping against the ground in time with the beat. Siren watched him with amusement, her tail flicking back and forth as she swayed to the rhythm. "You've got some moves," Siren said with a grin. Felix blushed under his fur, feeling a bit embarrassed, but Siren's laughter was infectious, and soon Felix found himself laughing too. They danced together in the shadows, their movements graceful and free as the music filled the night air around them. For the first time since leaving his flat, Felix felt truly alive. The city had opened up before him, revealing a world of adventure, excitement, and possibility that he had never imagined. Chapter 6. Brixton's Market Magic. The cold night air hummed with the sounds of life as Felix and Siren continued their adventure through the heart of Brixton. The narrow streets bustled with energy even after dark, alive with the chatter of vendors, the murmur of customers, and the clinking of coins exchanging hands. The market stalls were packed close together, their bright canopies creating a canopy of colors above Felix's head as he darted between the legs of people browsing the endless goods. Felix felt a buzz of excitement all around him, as if the city itself was pulsing with energy. He followed Siren closely, his eyes wide, as he took in the dazzling array of items on display. There were stalls selling novelty hats in every shape and color imaginable, top hats, beanies, baseball caps with clever slogans, and even woolen hats shaped like animals. A group of tourists giggled as they tried on oversized sunglasses and colorful wigs, and Felix couldn't help but purr with amusement at the sight of them. As they continued deeper into the market, the smells became even more tempting. There was a distinct aroma of fried food, spiced meats, and something sweet that Felix couldn't quite place. His stomach growled, reminding him that the little fish he had shared with Siren earlier wasn't nearly enough to satisfy his growing appetite. "This place is incredible," Felix said, glancing up at Siren, who was strolling beside him with the easy grace of someone who had roamed these streets many times before. I've never seen so many different things in one place." Siren smiled at him, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "Brixton's a melting pot," she said, her voice soft yet lively. "You can find anything here if you know where to look." They passed a stall selling vibrant T-shirts, adorned with bold prints and slogans that Felix didn't quite understand. He watched as a group of teenagers excitedly sifted through the racks, pulling out shirts with cartoon characters and famous landmarks splashed across the front. Nearby, another vendor was selling handcrafted jewelry, the delicate pieces glinting under the warm lights strung overhead. For a moment, Felix felt like he was part of something bigger than himself, a world full of people from all walks of life, each with their own stories and experiences. It was a far cry from the quiet, predictable life he had always known in his comfortable flat, and Felix found himself savoring every moment of it. As they continued through the market, Felix's nose twitched with delight as they approached a bustling food stall selling fresh fruits. The display was piled high with vibrant colors, plump oranges, ripe bananas, and strawberries that gleamed like jewels in the light. Felix's mouth watered at the sight of the fruit, and he darted forward, his paws light and quick as he swiped a small bunch of strawberries from the edge of the stall. He padded back to Siren, his heart racing with excitement as he dropped the strawberries at her paws. "I got us something," he said with a mischievous grin. Siren's eyes gleamed with approval as she bent down to sniff the berries. "Impressive," she said with a purr. "You're becoming quite the little thief." Felix beamed with pride as they sat together in the shadow of a nearby stall, sharing the sweet, juicy strawberries. The taste exploded in Felix's mouth, and he purred softly in contentment as he savored the sugary sweetness of the fruit. Siren ate beside him, her delicate paws handling the berries with practiced ease. For a few moments, everything felt perfect. The world around them hummed with life. But Felix was lost in the simple pleasure of the food and the company. He felt a warmth settle over him, not from the cold winter air, but from the strange bond he had formed with Siren over the course of the night. But then, as Felix popped another strawberry into his mouth, he realized that Siren had fallen silent. He turned his head, expecting to find her beside him, but to his surprise, she was gone. Chapter 7. Alone in the Night. Felix's heart skipped a beat as he looked around, his eyes scanning the bustling market for any sign of Siren. But she had vanished, disappearing into the shadows as easily as she had appeared earlier that night. Panic began to bubble up inside Felix as he stood up, his head swiveling from side to side as he searched for her silver fur among the crowds of people moving through the market. "Siren?" he called out softly, though his voice was drowned out by the noise of the bustling market. He took a few hesitant steps forward, his tail flicking nervously behind him as he continued to scan the area. But there was no sign of her, no trace of the sleek silver cat who had guided him through the city with such confidence. For a moment, Felix felt a pang of loneliness settle in his chest. He had grown so used to having Siren by his side that the thought of being alone in this vast, unfamiliar city filled him with a sense of unease. The streets that had once felt so thrilling and alive now seemed daunting and overwhelming without her presence. Felix padded through the market, his steps slow and uncertain as he tried to retrace his path. But the market had grown even busier since they had arrived, and the sea of people seemed to swallow him whole. Felix weaved through the crowd, his heart racing with anxiety as he searched for any sign of Siren. But the more he searched, the more it became clear that she was gone. A wave of disappointment washed over Felix as he realized that he was truly on his own now. He had no idea where he was or how to find his way back to his flat. The thrill of adventure that had fueled him earlier now felt like a distant memory, replaced by a growing sense of dread. Taking a deep breath, Felix tried to calm his racing thoughts. He wasn't helpless. He was a smart cat, and he could figure out how to get home. All he had to do was retrace his steps and find his way back to the alley where this adventure had begun. With newfound determination, Felix began to make his way out of the market. The streets were still busy, but Felix moved quickly, his paws light and swift, as he navigated the maze of stalls and shops. He ignored the tempting smells of food and the bright lights of the stalls, focusing only on the task at hand, finding his way home. Chapter 8. Journey Back to Safety. The streets of London were quieter now, the lively buzz of the market fading into the background as Felix ventured further away from Brixton. The cold night air nipped at his nose, and the snow crunched softly beneath his paws as he made his way through the winding alleys and narrow streets. The city was still a maze to him, but Felix trusted his instincts, following the faint memory of the path he had taken earlier in the evening. As he walked, Felix couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. Siren had disappeared so suddenly, leaving him without a word of explanation. He'd grown fond of her during their brief time together, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed when she left. Perhaps it was just the nature of cats like her. Wild, free-spirited creatures who came and went as they pleased. But Felix couldn't help but feel a sense of loss, as though he had lost a friend before they had truly had the chance to get to know each other. The lights of the West End soon came into view, and Felix felt a small surge of relief as he recognized the familiar streets. The grand theaters and bustling streets were still alive with activity, but Felix ignored the lure of the bright lights and focused on finding his way home. He followed the familiar scent of his building, his paws carrying him through the streets with a growing sense of purpose. The cold air stung his fur, but Felix barely noticed as he focused on the warm, comforting thought of his bed waiting for him inside the flat. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Felix reached the alley where his adventure had begun. The fire escape loomed above him, its metal steps gleaming faintly in the light of a nearby street lamp. Felix hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the city streets behind him. The adventure had been thrilling, and for a moment, Felix felt a pang of longing for the excitement and freedom that had come with it. But the warmth and safety of his home called to him, and Felix knew that he couldn't stay out in the cold any longer. With a soft sigh, Felix leapt onto the fire escape and climbed the steps with practiced ease. The window was still slightly ajar, just as it had been when he had left earlier that evening, and Felix slipped through the gap and into the warmth of the kitchen. The familiar scent of his home washed over him, and Felix felt a deep sense of relief settle in his chest as he padded across the floor and into the living room. His bed was waiting for him, soft and inviting, and Felix wasted no time curling up in its warmth. As he lay there, the events of the night played through his mind like a dream. The bustling markets, the stolen strawberries, the music that had filled the air. All of it felt like a distant memory now. But Felix knew that it was real. He had ventured into the world outside his flat, and he had returned, a little wiser and a little braver than before. And as Felix drifted off to sleep, his heart still racing with the thrill of his adventure, he knew that this wouldn't be the last time he ventured out into the city. There were still so many places left to explore, so many things to see and experience. But for now, Felix was content to dream of the night he had spent with Siren, and the strange, wonderful world of Brixton that had opened up before him. As sleep overtook him, Felix's purrs grew soft, blending with the quiet hum of the city outside his window, and for the first time in his life, he dreamed of adventures yet to come.